Hi there. In this lesson, we're going to talk about image correction. Now, most of the time, your pictures look pretty good right out of the camera, but most of the time, they can be greatly improved with very little effort once you know my simple three-step process. So let's get started. Here we've got a picture that it came right out of the camera. It looks pretty good, but it can be much better, and you'll see for yourself in a minute. So what I'd like to show you first is over here. It's called the Adjustments panel. Now the Adjustments panel makes adjustment layers, and I'll tell you about those in a moment. But what I want you to understand is that we don't need most of these buttons here, and there's no reason to memorize what they do. What you can do is just simply, when you put your mouse over each one, it tells you what it is right up here, so watch. See how it changes name? The first one we're going to use is actually the second button in the top row. It's called Levels. Now when we open up Levels, it gives us a little box here where we can control it, and it has what's called a histogram. Now you may have seen this on your camera, so I'd like to take a little sidebar for a minute and talk about your camera. You can have this little graph come up on your camera to determine whether or not your exposure is correct, because you can't always trust the little screen on the back. So check this out. This is actually a bar graph that shows you the tones that are in the image. So think of it this way. It's a bar graph with 256 columns. Shadows are always on the left, highlights are always on the right. So it goes from black to white. And in this graph here, it's showing we've got a lot of sort of dark areas, which you can see here in the picture. Now I want you to understand that this graph, the shape doesn't matter, and the height of it doesn't matter either. It's the width of it. We want our shadows nice and dark, we want our highlights nice and white, but when we're looking at our camera, most cameras have the histogram that you can bring up. If it's running off the right-hand side of the scale, it means your image is too light. It's overexposed. And likewise, if it's all clumped up down at the left-hand side of the scale here, that means it's underexposed. So what we want to do is make sure, especially, that our image is not running off the right-hand side of the scale, because highlights that are blown out are almost impossible to restore in Photoshop. So here we've got an image that's pretty well exposed. The whole picture is well within the range of black and white. So let's get back on Photoshop now. What we're going to do here is we're going to use a foolproof method to set our highlights and shadows. So here's the trick. On your Windows machine, you hold down Alt, and on Macintosh, you hold down Option. And then you position your mouse over the little black slider right here. So hold down that button, press, and then as you begin to slide it over to the right, you'll see a preview of areas where the shadows are getting clogged up. Now what I mean by that is that they're totally black, they've got no detail in them, and we don't want that. We want to have our shadows nice and dark, but still have detail. So what I recommend is you just drag this till you start seeing some specks appearing like this, and that's where you would stop. And then likewise on the other end of the scale, hold down the Alt or Option, grab the highlight slider, and begin sliding that over to the left. And as you slide it, you'll start to see highlights that are getting blown out. And what I mean by that is that they're totally white and they have no detail in them. So we don't want that to happen. So we just drag it until we start seeing some specks appearing, kind of like this. And that's where you would stop. So now what we've done here is we've set the tonal range of the picture to match what's actually in the file. And then down here towards the bottom, I'd like you to notice in the Layers panel that it's added an adjustment layer for levels. There's the little symbol for levels right there. Now we've got a whole lesson coming up later that's all about layers, so I'm not going to really go into a lot of detail here, but I just want you to understand that it's added a layer. And you can turn the layer on and off by clicking this little eyeball right here, and you can see the before and after. So check this out. This picture is looking better already. Now the other beauty of this is that at a later date, you can go back and by double clicking right on this symbol right here, it'll bring back this panel exactly the way you left it so you can make changes, and this doesn't do any harm to the original picture. That's the beauty of it. No harm done. It's what we call non-destructive editing. So let's go to step number 2. Step number 1 was levels. Step number 2 is color balance. It's the little button right here that looks like scales. Now there's a reason why we do these in this order. It's that if the levels are wrong, sometimes it'll induce a color cast. So there's no sense fixing the color, then going back and changing the levels, and then having to change the color again. So we do the levels first, always. Now the way we do this is great because you don't have to understand color theory to work with this. You just start with the top slider up here, and you grab the little slider, move it a little to the left and see if it looks better. Move it to the right and see if it looks a little better. Okay, well I'm just going to make a mental note that more cyan made it look better. Now I'll put this back to 0. Next I'll move down to the slider in the middle, move it a little to the left. Nope, that doesn't look better. Move it to the right. That does look better. So I'll put it back to 0. And then finally the bottom slider. That doesn't really look better. That definitely doesn't look better. In fact, it's worse. Alright, well now I know something. I know that more cyan looked better and more green looked better. And out of the two, cyan made the biggest difference. So I'll start with that. So I'll add a little cyan in there until it looks better. Looks better. And then maybe try a little bit of green too. Alright, I think that really looks great. Now when you do this on your own computer, your numbers might be different than mine. In fact, they probably will be. That's because color is subjective. What you think looks good and what I think looks good might not be identical. But the thing is, you're the artist. You decide what's going to look good. If it looks good to you, it should look good for everybody else too. So you're the one that makes the decisions on these things. Now I want you to notice down here in the layers panel, it's added another adjustment layer for color balance. You can see the symbol right there. You can turn it on and off with a little eyeball. Wow, look at the difference there. Alright, we're making good progress. Now the final step is actually it's an optional step. It's right here, V for Vibrance. The Vibrance panel has two controls. It's got Vibrance and Saturation. And they both do similar things just in a different way. They both increase or decrease the intensity of the color. So saturation does it just across the board. It increases the intensity of everything equally, whereas Vibrance does it on the colors that need it the most. So what I recommend is just try them both out. I think you'll find that you like Vibrance better. So I'm just going to go with Vibrance right now because I already know that's what's going to look good. So you drag it to the right, and it increases the intensity of the color. You can see here I've gone a little too far. And if you drag it to the left, it decreases the intensity of the color. See that? So that can be used as a special effect, but in this case, I just want to brighten the colors up just a tiny bit. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Let's go back down to the Layers panel and click the little eyeball on and off. Very subtle difference. May not even be visible on the video, but it does indeed make it look better. Now, let's take a look at what it looked like in the beginning as opposed to the way it looks right now. So I'll go back down here to the Layers panel, and I'm going to use a little trick here. I'm going to hold down the Alt or the Option button and click on the eyeball for the background layer, and that turns the view off for everything else. So we started with this, and we ended up with this. I think you can agree with me that's 10 times better, and once you know how to do these steps, it only takes a matter of seconds to do it. So this is a huge improvement with almost no effort. It's worth doing this all the time. So let's do another picture. I'm going to click the little close box up here to close this one up. And I'd like to go to this one next. We've got a nice portrait here of a young lady. So let's go through our three-step process and see if we can improve this picture. So step number 1, levels. And once again, I'm going to hold down the Alt or the Option. and click on the slider for the shadows, and you can see it's already got some specks appearing, so it does not need to be moved. Now, for the highlights, once again, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, grab the highlight slider, and begin moving that over until I start seeing some specks appearing, and that's where we would stop. So we've made a little bit of an improvement here. Kind of made the picture look a little more snappy. Next, step number 2 was color balance. So let's take a look here. Let's start with the top slider. We'll grab it, move it to the left. Does it look better? Not really. Move it the other way? Nope, that doesn't look better either. So we'll just put it back to 0 and just make a mental note that that did not help. Now, let's go to the middle one. Nope, not better. Nope, not better. Okay, so we'll put that back to 0. And finally, the bottom one. No, and no. Okay, well this one did not need any color adjustment, but that's okay. At least we checked it to see if it could be made better. So we'll just close that up, and let's go to step number 3 for Vibrance. Now I'd like to give you some advice here on Vibrance. When you're dealing with a portrait of a person, it's usually not a good idea to increase the vibrance or the saturation. And the reason for that is because when you increase the intensity of skin tones, they turn orange. So I don't recommend doing that. If anything, sometimes you might want to actually bring the vibrance down a little bit so that the skin isn't so radiant looking and a little more natural. So just take a look at it and make your own decision how you want to go with that. But that's my advice. So we'll close this one up. So our girl here is looking a lot better. It didn't need much, but that little bit of extra time, just those few seconds that we spent, is enough to make a difference here. So I'm going to close her up. Now let's do this one. This picture here is really unremarkable, but maybe we can make something of it. So let's go back to our process. Step number 1, you might recall, is levels. So we'll bring that up, hold down the Alt or the Option, and start with the shadow slider. We'll just drag it till we see some specks appearing, kind of like this. Then we'll go to the highlights and do the same thing. Alt or Option, and then click and drag this until we start seeing some specks appearing. All right, so I suspect it's looking better already. Let's check it with the little eyeball in the layers panel. Yep, looking a little better. Now let's go to color balance. More cyan? No. More red? Actually, the more red did look a little bit better. Okay, so I'll put it back to 0 and try the next one. More magenta. Oops, more magenta. No, neither one of those looked good. At least not to me anyway. And finally, the bottom one. No, I didn't really like either one of those either. Okay, but it looked like a little bit more red. Looked good, so we'll dial in a little bit of red. Oops, here we go. Try that again. Okay, so that's looking better. So levels was first, then color balance. That leaves us vibrance. So let's try the vibrance and see if that improves it. Oh, it's actually looking kind of nice now. That really makes some of the sky come out. So we did indeed improve this picture. Let's take a look at the before and after. I think that looks a lot better, don't you? Well, I can't hear you here, but I bet you're agreeing with me. So anyway, that one looks better, so let's put that away. And then I've got just one more that I'd like to show you. All right, this one here, I mean, you can tell by looking at this picture that it's a mess already. So let's go to work on it. Step number 1 is levels. And we'll hold down Alt or Option, start with the shadows, and, well, those don't need to be moved. Now we'll go to the highlights, hold down Alt or Option, and this picture is a tiny bit overexposed. We definitely do not want to make it worse by moving the highlight slider, so we'll leave those be. Step number 2, color balance. I know we can make the color better on this one, So let's go through our steps here. We'll start with the top slider. More cyan. Yeah, it looks a little better. More red. Definitely not. So we'll put it back to 0. Then the next slider down. More magenta. Ooh, definitely not. More. Oh, wait a minute. More green's looking mighty nice. All right, so I'll make a note of that and put that back to 0. And finally, the bottom one. More yellow. It's better. More blue. Definitely not. We'll put that back to 0. So it looked to me like green made a big difference on this, and maybe yellow. So let's just start with green because we can make a big difference there. Ah, it's looking great already. Let's see if some yellow added. Yeah, maybe just a tiny bit looks good. All right, I think that looks a lot better, don't you? Now step number 3, of course it's optional, but step number 3 is vibrance. Let's see if a little vibrance would make this look better. I think maybe a little bit does help. All right, so just to see the before and after just for fun, we went from that to that. Big, big improvement. All right, well, that's basic image improvement, or image correction rather. We just do the 3-step process. Levels, color balance, and then vibrance, and that really makes a big difference. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I will see you in the next one.